So I'd like to welcome everyone to this initiative by BML Munjal University, which is based in India, in Haryana side. It's about an hour away from International Airport in Delhi. And I'm very happy to welcome a vast array of experts on this panel today, on this webinar, who have great experience in reviewing papers, and they know exactly what works, in terms of a fantastic paper and what doesn't work in terms of a rejection. So I thought it's best, for us to all be together so we can have a look at all these different type of perspectives, and a lot of advice will obviously be given. I am Professor Payal Kumar. I am the Professor and Chair HROB at BML Munjal University, which we call for short BMU. And I'm also the Associate Dean International Relations. And this webinar today is on the critical perspectives in academic writing and peer review. So just a couple of issues before I introduce this wonderful panel. And that is that, we as scholars are very concerned about our South Asian scholarship. We all have that common concern. As reviewers, all of us do a lot of international reviews, for other, not just these journals, but for other journals also, A category journals, all of us, we have that experience. And we find some commonalities when we are, reviewing the papers of academics, scholars in South Asia. Not quite sure what the reason is. It could perhaps be in our training. We need to maybe be a bit more robust in our doctoral training. There could be many reasons for this. I mean, one of them, what we notice when I discuss with other international reviewer members, and they say things like, theoretical development tends to be very weak, theoretical development. So hopefully that's one issue we'll touch upon today. Another issue that we find is in papers, the discussion section also tends to be rather weak, discussion. So, a lot of scholars, they will do a lot of effort in a particular study and maybe come up, do an empirical study, statistical analysis, come up with results, and the conclusion will just be like a couple of paragraphs. So, I mean, that's really not adequate, because you have to also explain, apart from your literature gap, like what was the point of your piece of research. The so what question is often not answered in the discussion section. And another common thing that we find is that while scholars will spend a lot of time, probably because there's excitement if the hypothesis is supported, but if a hypothesis go back to the literature to look at certain theories, and one can gain brownie points by explaining why a particular hypothesis is not supported. So this is just a little introduction to the topic. I'm sure a lot more things are going to be covered. I'd like to just introduce the speakers with a little, one by one. Dr. Mohan Thite, he's the founding editor-in-chief of South Asian Journal of Human Resource Management, a well-known journal published by SAGE. He's a prolific author and researcher who's done over 100 book chapters, articles, conference papers, books, etc. He's currently associate professor at Griffith University, Australia, and has about 30 years work experience earlier in industry and now in academia. And his research area is strategic human resource management, digital HRM, international HRM, etc. So if you can just say hi, Professor Thite, before I introduce the others, just a little wave. Great to have you. Thank you. Dr. Pavitra Kalispati, she's Associate Editor of South Asian Journal of Human Resource Management, published by SAGE. Her research interests are gender, work, family, conflict, and leadership. She is Professor HRM at University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and she holds a PhD from University of Melbourne, Australia. So hi to you. Thank you for the wave and the smile. Dr. R. Srinivasan, he's Professor Strategy at IIM Bangalore, India. He serves on the editorial board, again, he serves on the editorial board of the Asian Journal of Management Cases, again, SAGE. And he is also served as Vice President of the Case Research Society of India. And he's mentored a lot of faculty and doctoral scholars in case writing and research, so we can have a lot of input from him. And his research interests are rapid growth firm, platform-mediated networks, and strategic decision-making in top management. He has got his doctoral degree from IIM Ahmedabad, which is obviously a premier institution in India. Hello, sir, welcome. I'd also like to say a few words about Ms. Aisha Khan. She's the managing editor of Asian Journal of Management Cases, published by SAGE. I've been working with her for many years. In fact, earlier I was at SAGE, so we've known each other professionally for many years. She currently serves as the Communications and Case Research Unit Manager at LUMS, Pakistan, and she has extensive experience in academic publishing and teaching. She's conducted several training sessions and roundtables in writing and teaching by case methodology for faculty members and doctoral scholars. She has her MA in English from Karachi University. Hi, Aisha.
Hi.
How are you?
Thanks.
Dr. Shakil Jaja. He is Associate Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at Suleiman Dawood School of Business, Lahore University of Management Science, Pakistan, where he has also served as Director Executive MBA Program. His pedagogical cases have been published in Harvard Business School Publishing, Case Research Journal of North America Case Research Association, and in Asian Journal of Management Cases. He has a PhD in Operation Management from LUMS. So welcome, sir. Great to have you. So if I could just, request Dr. Mohan Thite to start this off, and if you can, talk for about 10 minutes about your journal, and let's talk about the aims and scope, because it's so important, as we all know, that the better fit of a paper all about, and that would help our the participants in this webinar. Over to you, Dr. Mohan.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and good evening from Brisbane. Thank you, Professor Payal, for inviting South Asian Journal of HRM editorial board to this seminar. Very great to see you all. I will briefly introduce the journal and broadly talk about the desk review that we conduct when article is submitted to the journal, and if it passes the desk review, it then goes to the associate editors. So one of our associate editors, Dr. Pavitra, is here, and she will talk to you as to how the paper progresses through the peer review process. To begin with, the South Asian Journal of HRM, as the name suggests, has got a distinct geographical focus. We set it up about 7 years ago. Pavitra is one of the founding members of the journal. When we set it up, the desire was that obviously this is a very, very important part of the world, and there needs to be more impetus on the indigenous research on this area. So, we wanted to specifically focus on HR issues both at the macro level and at the micro level. So we invite papers from labor economics research and so on. So at all levels of HRM, micro, macro, and all aspects of HRM, as long as the paper is situated in one of the South Asian countries as defined by the SAARC region. Now, this focus is very important because sometimes, even in India and other places, we tend to follow the journal ranking systems of other countries, such as the ABDC journal system, Australia Business Deans Council ranking system. Even though the ABDC people very clearly state that the ranking is especially meant for the Australian and New Zealand academics. So they obviously give importance to papers from their region and meant for the academics from that region. So I hope going forward in countries like India, Pakistan, elsewhere, we will give more emphasis on indigenous research, and hopefully as the quality picks up, they also become global journals. So that's essentially about SAGRM. And in terms of the acceptance of papers, typically in most of these sessions, people talk about the process part, but I would like to talk about the elephant in the room, the political part. And it's not that I'm going to come out with any explosive news here, but I thought it's very important for an author to keep themselves in the shoes of the editorial board and see what happens on the other side of the equation, which is not often discussed. The first thing we need to keep in mind that, we all have heard the adage, publish or perish. But ever since India and China have resolved to push forward, with academics publishing in journals, there has been an epidemic of, submission of papers, if not pandemic, with every journal receiving very, very high number of submissions. We are only 7-year-old, and we receive now about 250 papers per year, and we have only 2 issues, and we publish only 7 papers in each issue. That means 14 papers per year, and we receive 250 submissions. So as you can imagine, if you were in my position as an editor, the first thing I would look at a paper when it comes across my desk review is how I can reject this paper. Now, this is the brutal reality, because if you've got 250 papers and you cannot push too many papers into peer review, because that is the second problem, which is that every journal today, no matter how highly regarded it is, including A-star journals, are finding it very, very difficult to get very good quality peer reviewers, right? Oftentimes, they ask the authors of special issues to peer review each other's. And this happens even in A-star journals. So you need to realize that the task of an editor is extremely harsh, and therefore they need to be very critical. So you basically get about 5 minutes time when your paper goes to the desk review. And in that 5 minutes time, if you do not catch the attention of the editor, in all likelihood, it's going to be rejected. So 75% of the papers that are submitted, even to a young journal like ours, get rejected at the desk review stage itself. Now, you may think that's very brutal, and whether the editor, if they're spending only, 5 to 10 minutes, would they really do justice to each paper? The fact is this, that first of all, in those 5 minutes, we will see whether the article has got an interesting topic, whether it has been well written, whether it has been well edited, and whether it has got a serious chance of going through the peer review. And then only, it goes to the next stage. So you essentially get 5 minutes, and then that tells you how serious you need to be before you submit even to a young journal like ours. Otherwise, it's simply going to be waste of time. So I'll very quickly summarize in the 4-5 minutes that I've got as to what I look at when I'm doing the desk review, right? The first thing I look at is the research topic. Now, particularly in the field of human resource management, nearly 80-90% of the papers are on organizational behavior. Now, there's nothing wrong about it, but the fact is that we are an HR journal, and there is subtle difference between HR and OB, but at the same time, it is still a considerable difference. In HR, we look at more on policy and practice rather than statistical correlation that is normally the focus in organizational behavior type of journals. So be very careful in what type of journals you get into, because it takes a month or so to get the first review, and then it gets stuck into the peer review. You don't want to get rejected after 5, 6, 7, 8 months of waiting only to go to another journal. So you be very, very careful as to which journal you're submitting. The topic is very important, and let the title of your paper be interesting, attractive, innovative, contemporary, right? If it is a very boring kind of title, now again, the mind starts switching off. The second point is the structure, right? The abstract, the introduction. Now, the first page is very, very crucial, because as an editor, again, we don't go beyond first page unless it catches our attention. So your title, your abstract, your introduction has to be really, really catchy, interesting, innovative. Tell us what it is about and how we are going to deal with it. The second aspect is language and editing. This is the biggest problem for us, particularly in the South Asian region. 75% of the papers get rejected simply because they are very, very poorly written. Every paper needs to be professionally edited. And if you don't do that, even though it costs money, if you don't do that, you have no chance of going through the hoopla at all. So language and editing is extremely important. The third part is discussion. Now, this is where, again, typically people tend to focus on statistical kind of analysis. But what you need to do here is focus on policy and practice, not just the statistical justification. And particularly for a journal like ours, we see whether your literature review has covered South Asian region, whether in the discussion section, you are focusing on the implications of your results on other South Asian countries. That's very important. Lastly, you need to customize your paper to the journal that you're submitting. We see many papers that were earlier sent to Emerald because Emerald journals have got a very specific way of doing abstract. And when it gets rejected there, people simply forward it to other journals where the abstract requirement is exactly different. So, you can very easily find out, whether you have tried to customize. I'm not saying, change the reference in every way and so on, but at least try to make sure that the submission requirements have been properly met. So that finishes my time, and I'll be glad to answer anything more later on. Thank you.
Thank you. That was perfect, perfectly timed. Thank you so much. You crammed in a lot of information. It's scary information, I must say. 75% rejection rate. You only look at the first page. Oh my goodness. So that means, obviously the heading, the abstract keywords, and your introduction are of absolutely crucial importance, isn't it? When you are, so that you don't, so that you get through the desk review. So that's absolutely
right. Yep.
And just very quickly, I often say to doctoral scholars that, and possibly you'll agree with me, that get your paper copy edited before you send it out. Very often they'll wait for the peer review comments, and the peer review will say, get it proofread, which basically means get it copy edited. So it's better to do this beforehand. And I think Chinese scholars have they do this as a process. Their English happens to be weaker than ours, but they get it copy edited, then they send it out for publication, then very often it gets published. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely, Payal. I think people, particularly young scholars, tend to follow the kind of protocol that they follow while writing their thesis. The problem statement, hypothesis statement, and that. And the typical articles are not written that way. So you need to understand how to write articles other than how to write thesis.
Absolutely, how to do the hook. I mean, there's a lot of Academy of Management, article on how to write the hook is simply based on the introduction itself. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you. If I can now turn to Dr. Kalispati, if you could just talk to us a little bit about, more challenges, pitfalls, kind of what advice would you give? Let's say you're talking to, for example, a doctoral scholar who's maybe sent out one paper, it's got rejected. What kind of advice would you give?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. So I will continue from where Mohan left, as I'm an associate editor. So whatever passes through the editor-in-chief's desk is sent to the associate editors. So from this point of view, when a paper comes from the editor to the associated editor, we have to go through the manuscript, and either if we feel there is a chance that it can be accepted for publication, we will process it to find reviewers. If we feel it's not that great, won't have a chance from the reviewer's point of view, then we will reject it at the associate editor stage. Based on my experience for the last 7 years, in terms of the papers, why they get rejected either by the associate editor or by the reviewers is mainly is quality of manuscript. So when I say quality of manuscript in terms of the content, that it is not aligned. What I mean by alignment is that sometimes authors will say this is our objective or purpose of the research, but that doesn't match with what they review in the literature, or if it's a quantitative paper, the conceptual model doesn't fit with what their purpose is. And then in terms of methodology, it doesn't fit with what they are supposed to do. So one of the main reasons in terms of quality of manuscript is the alignment of the different sections, as well as all the required content or sections are not in the manuscript. Sometimes the methodology, research method section might be very brief, doesn't set out everything, what they are supposed to say, how the paper is organized, language, writing, and so on. So that is one of the main reasons. The second one I would say is in terms of rigor. Rigor in methodology, as well as rigor in arguments and theory development or theoretical development. So whether it's a qualitative research or quantitative research, theory, and also the appropriate analysis that is not present in the paper. Then another reason could be, as Mohan pointed out, the paper has to fit to the journal in terms of the journal scope, that it has to be a research that has been done in one of the South Asian countries, or maybe it can be even a comparative study. So it has to fit to our aim of South Asia. And another reason is relevance to the existing literature. So there has to be, the research has to be based in the existing literature. And it will be good if they can identify a theoretical or empirical gap in the literature, and then this particular research is filling that gap. So again, that's related to the literature. And the literature has to be an updated literature, not something very dated, outdated. I mean, you brought up the issue of, both of you brought up the issue of language and getting it edited, proofread. I mean, you can send it to somebody to proofread, edit, or you can ask some of your colleagues to do it. And even there are softwares like Grammarly where you have the basic version that you can do it yourself. Some of the basic things like even typos can be sorted out if you can use some free software like that. Because after a certain point, when there's a lot of language writing issues, it starts to irritate and bias the reviewer as well as the editors, because what it shows is, if you don't put the effort for your own paper when you are writing, right, why are the reviewers or editors going to be bothered about it? So you need to show your intent and your interest for that research and to get it published. And one of the basic things is how you write it. So you need to really put some care, because what we think is, if you don't put the care that is required to write a paper, why should anybody else? Said that, as a young journal, we still, as editor and associate editor, put in a lot of time in addition to the reviewers to give feedback and line by line edit and send that feedback also to the to the authors, so that they can improve. So we do that if we feel there is a chance for this paper to be accepted.
So thank you.
I
You've
think
also
more
then a huge amount of information, Professor, in a very short time. That's quite an art. So you also spoke about writing, rigor, fit, and relevance. So writing, again, I think is a very common thread that we all feel that needs to be done very meticulously, very well. Every word needs to be thought out of, every paragraph, every reference you're taking, every citation, what is the relevance of that? And then you spoke about rigor. Of course, rigor has to be there. Fit, as I said, is very important, and relevance. You did mention literature review has to be up to date. What I find very often, as you may possibly do too, as a reviewer, is that people, they finish their thesis and then they try and convert some part of that into a paper. But then your thesis has gone over the last few years, right? And so your literature would be totally outdated. So you're absolutely right. One needs to keep adding absolutely the latest literature, but also not forgetting the extant literature, not missing out on any of the extant literature, which is very critical to your area of research. So yeah, thank you for that. And there is one question I'd just like to pose to the first two, any of the first two speakers can take this up. It's in the chat box. One question is being asked that what components are important and essential to keep in mind when writing a conceptual paper, which is based more on qualitative, like with a qualitative bent, more conceptual. What do you think people have to keep in mind?
As I said, whether it's a qualitative paper or a quantitative paper, as long as you think your, whether it's the conceptual paper is like the first step of a research, that you can make a contribution. There should be a novel contribution to the knowledge. So that means there is a gap in the literature. So it has to be framed, or this paper should be developed to fill that gap. So we are not looking for replicate studies. So it has to be something that hasn't been done, and you can develop your conceptual paper or that research to fill that gap. And another main component should be, there should be a theoretical lens, and the propositions or whatever you develop should be based on the literature as well as the theory. Anything else, Mohan, you would like to add?
Fine. Dr. Mohan, if I can ask you another question. We've got a lot of interested people here. I'm looking again at the question answer section. Gopi Krishna P. I've noticed particular aspects in a paper get repeated in multiple sections. I mean, we all see that, including introduction, analysis, and discussion. Does this create a sense of repetition, and can it put off the reviewers? Could you shed a bit of light on that, Dr. Mohan?
Thanks, Payal. Just before that, I would like to, just touch upon what Pavitra was saying, because the first and the second question both are related. They're about the conceptual papers. And I think, the best beacon as far as conceptual papers is concerned is the Academy of Management Review. Now that is a very tough ask. Let me first honestly put it, writing a conceptual paper. It's not just, literature review. You need to develop propositions, testable propositions in a very authoritative manner. So it is typically unusual for a young scholar to try conceptual paper, because sometimes people think, oh, let me just take the literature review section of my thesis and put it as a conceptual paper. It doesn't work that way. Typically, conceptual papers are done by thought leaders who have very advanced, very innovative way of thinking, and they're putting them forward as a kind of a proposition forward for further discussion. So the best advice I could give for young scholars is, if you want to write conceptual paper, try to see whether you can at least do a pilot test of your conceptual paper. I have published a few papers like that in A-star journals. That is quite acceptable, because you have developed the proposition, you have done a very quick pilot study as a kind of preliminary results, and then you develop that further. So that's one this thing. So coming to Gopi Krishn's question, well, not really. I mean, the writing process is such, Gopi Krishnan, that it takes at least 15 to 20 drafts before you even finalize a paper from your own side. So every day you write something, and then the next day you get up and then you look at it and say, well, oh, did I really write that? it sounds so stupid. So from your own perspective, individual perspective, you see the paper developing and you can take care of that kind of repetition part. It's not repetition really, because in the introduction, you are, putting forward the topic in an interesting way. Then in the literature section, you're developing it further. In the result section, you're testing it. And in the discussion section, you are looking back and thinking, okay, how is it related to policy, practice, previous research, and so on. So if you really stick to the rigor of the, how a paper is constructed, I don't think repetition is going to be a real problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If I could just add to it, I mean, I did attend one session at the AOM where somebody beautifully explained, you do find that the research objective or something like that is repeated in the discussion, not just repeated, but it's just brought in again before you conclude and have a discussion section. And that's basically because peer reviewers would read your paper, not a peer reviewer may not read every section of your paper, but they'll definitely read the discussion. So it's better just to put it there again as a kind of a reminder. So that's one reason. Thank you so much. If I could request Dr. Srinivas, if you could talk about case studies and what makes a publishable case study. You've got a lot of rich experience over here. If you could share some pearls of wisdom.
Good afternoon, good evening, depending on which side of the geography you are in. We're going to talk about case studies, and quite a lot of times people do confuse write cases as if they're writing stories. A story about a company is different from a case. A journalistic report about a company is what most people read in newspapers. They read about a particular company, and the way a journalist writes about a company is typically how a lot of cases do land up at the reviewer's desk. I want to talk about cases are very different from a story or a journalistic report. There are 4 primary ingredients to a good teaching case. The first of it is it should have a good sense of counterintuition, a discontinuity. You expect something to be like this, and it is not like that. I don't need a lot of research at the end of all of this case writing to come and tell me rich people live in big houses and poor people live in small houses. A case is about finding a discontinuity and to be able to, like very similar to a research paper which has a gap, a case has to highlight a discontinuity. You don't expect this to happen, and it happens. And therefore, I'm the novel in the case. The second thing about a case, and quite a lot of people don't understand this, they just opportunistically write cases, is the positioning of the case. It fits the course, the module, the specific session. A case is taught in a particular session. If I want to teach a particular case in a particular session, then the case learning goals should be specific to the session. I can't have a case written to talk customer relationship management or marketing. No, sorry. Marketing is a full course. You can't teach a case for a whole course. So specific to a session, that positioning is extremely important. A third thing is a case should connect theory and practice. Why do business schools teach cases? They teach cases because they want to connect this. The case context has the practice world, and the decision that the case protagonist takes has to evoke the theory. The criteria that he uses to make the decision should come from the theory. Stronger the relationship to the theory, better the quality of learning in the classroom, and therefore better the case. So a lot of cases have wonderful narratives, wonderful write-ups, but they don't connect very well to the theory. It's extremely important to connect to the theory. And the fourth thing this is about the context of the case. I call it 3 R's. It should be real, not a fictional company. It should be relatable. I should be able to relate to it. You talk to me about a Venezuelan grocery chain, very difficult for me possibly to relate. And it should be recent as my lifetime. It should not be so far away in the past that I can't relate to it. So it's extremely important that we keep these 4 things in mind: counterintuition, absolutely correct positioning, connecting theory and practice, and the real relatable recent nature of the case. Along with the case is a very important part is called as a teaching note. I want to highlight this idea that when a case comes to me for review, the first thing that I read is a teaching note. I don't read the case. I read the teaching note first. I want to know what is it that the theory, what is the purpose, what is the positioning, all of this is in the teaching note. So the teaching note defines the learning objectives. It defines the theoretical base. It defines all of these that we're talking about, the context of the case. it provides the instructor enough confidence and ammunition to adopt the case for her teaching class. It has all the information. It has all the ammunition to go stand in front of the class. It provides the readings for the students as well as specific readings for the instructors. And quite a lot of times they could be different. I want to prepare the instructor very differently than the student because I want the instructor to be a little more knowledgeable about the context as well as this thing. I expect the instructor to know the theory more than the students. So therefore, different sets of readings for the instructors, different sets of readings for the students, and discussion questions. Quite a lot of times cases have to be in the positioning of the discussion questions. And lastly, every teaching note should have two broad contents. Analysis of the discussion questions, as if you are writing an exam. Think of it as a case exam that you're writing. Write the answers to the discussion questions and specific teaching postures. What do I do in a 90-minute class? First 15 minutes, next 20 minutes, next 15 minutes. The postures of the class. If you're able to put all of this together, you will have a wonderful teaching note. And remember, I don't read the case first. I read the teaching note first before I do anything else in the case when I'm reviewing a case.
So I liked what you said that, a good case is that which turns something on its head, instead of one intuitively feeling X leads to Y, it could be Y leading to X or some, reverse causality, something which one is completely unexpected. So that would grab your eyeballs as a reviewer, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and you also mentioned, so many other things, wonderful tips.
It's not just about grabbing the eyeballs. It's extremely important for writing a case. I don't want to write a case to say that, the Tata Group is India's largest group. We all know it. You don't have to write a case about how big the Tata Group is. You talk about a governance failure in Tata Group, that makes a wonderful case.
And you also said, which is very interesting, that you first read the teaching note. So what exactly, 2-3 points that you look for in a teaching note that would really attract you as a reviewer?
So I'm going to look at the teaching note in terms of how strong is the relationship between the context and the theory. Do I need this case? Is this case going to help me advance my students' understanding of the theory? That's the first thing I'm going to look at. And at the end of this case, reading this teaching note, am I better prepared to teach this case myself? Can I go and take this and teach this in my class? And the sharp positioning, how sharply is it positioned to a specific session? The 7th session, after I introduced these concepts, to talk about this particular framework is why I will use this case. Rather than say, this case is useful for teaching marketing.
So do you think, Sarah, it would be useful to actually have, webinars, seminars on simply how to write a case in terms of the teaching note? Because that's a very specific, specialized document, which is not that easy to do, is it not? I'm sure you'd be rejecting a lot of papers and you'd be getting frustrated. Do you think, maybe in the future we could take up something like this, a webinar specifically on writing teaching notes?
And the best part, the bitter part of it is the teaching notes never get published.
Yeah, that's a hidden thing, right.
As a case writer, I would spend 2/3 of my time writing a good teaching note. But the 1/3 of the time that I spent on, the case gets published, the teaching note never gets published. And therefore, a lot of case authors undervalue the teaching note.
And there has to be a theory there also in the note, right? There has to be some kind of theoretical development, or at least draw on theory. Is that right? Okay, wonderful. We'll come back to you. Thank you so much. Appreciate your points. If I could now ask Dr. Jhaja, again, if you can kind of talk about what do peer reviewers look for in terms of cases? What do peer reviewers look for?
Definitely, Payal, thank you very much for inviting on this. What is the expectations of reviewers when they review a case? So I will try to continue and endorse some of the points that Professor Srinivasan has already mentioned, and also try to elaborate how the review process works and what is that reviewers want in a good case. So I think the first things that a reviewer would note is that which program this case is going to be taught in. For example, in undergraduate program or MBA or executive MBA or executive education. So maybe, graduate programs versus undergraduate programs. So faculty members write cases for undergraduate programs also, which are more specific, more have less breadth, are very focused on on a specific problem in a specific domain of a subject. And they are not very long, maybe 1 page or 2 pages long cases. Whereas MBA or executive education cases, they are broad spectrum cases. They focus on one issue. For example, in operations management, they might be focusing on lean management. In marketing, they might be focusing on 1C of 5 C's in marketing. But at the same time, they will be talking about HR issues, finance issues, some strategy issues, or operations issues. So because in managerial world, even if you are tackling a marketing problem, it is never isolated from other problems that exist inside the organization. So graduate level cases are more broad as well as deep in a certain area. Then the next thing that the reviewer would look at is the course that this case is going to be taught into. So in that, they will, if this is a typical conventional course, for example, operations management or marketing or maybe human resource management, then reviewers can easily relate to the course, and then they can see that how this case is going to fit into that course. But if, for example, you're teaching a case or you're writing a case for a more emerging field, for example, digital marketing, or you are writing case for data analytics in operations management, or maybe technology in agribusiness. Now, these are more, emerging courses. And as a result, it will be difficult for the reviewers, or maybe, if the reviewer is not from the same area, to place the case in that context. So it would be good for the case writer to elaborate the course nature where the case is going to fit into, and then the topic or theme that this case is going to talk about. And then I think very specific and sharp mentioning of learning objectives that the instructor wants to achieve with this case. So I would say maybe 3 or 4 learning objectives, which you consider as your primary learning objectives, and then maybe 2 or 3 that can be considered as secondary learning objectives. And learning objectives are, I think, the most important aspects, because that's what the instructor is looking at when instructor is choosing your case. So very carefully define your learning objectives, because this is going to be, I would say, a yardstick on which your case is going to be evaluated in the review process. Meaning, to what extent your case and your teaching note that I'm going to talk about in a while is meeting or helping the instructor achieve the learning objectives. So this is, I think, as far as the goals of your case is concerned, meaning which program, which course, which theme, what are the learning objectives. That's the goal of your case. Then I think the second thing that I would look at as a reviewer is the excitement in the case. I mean, the excitement for the students and for the faculty. So students get excited about the case if the case is about a company that they are already aware of, or they have somehow already a perception of or impression of that company as excelling in a certain area, or this issue is already common or already known and people want to understand this and know more about it. So I think that creates an excitement. So also, for example, as Professor Srinivasan was earlier mentioning, that, for example, if you are sitting in India and you are selecting, you would be very less likely to select a case which is written on Venezuela or Mexico on a small retail chain. So you would be looking for cases which are related to India or Pakistan, or on companies which are commonly known. The second thing is the issue, the strength, the tension, the excitement for knowing about that issue. So that is what is going to be important. Then also how much data is given to understand that issue, how illustrative the case is, the companies, the data is, and understanding that issue. And also sometimes readers are put off or get excited by the length of the case. So for example, these days, there is a lot of trend towards reducing length of cases. Even at Harvard Business School Publishing, they are now revising some of their extended cases into abridged versions, so that they get more attraction from students as well as faculty. So I think try to optimize the length of your case so that it is attractive for the readers. Then also excitement, a lot of excitement is created by the text and a combination of text, videos, figures, exhibits, some news clips, how you use them. How do you put them together to create an excitement for a common reader? So I think these are some of the aspects that are important for faculty as well as students when they are looking at a case and they get excitement or motivation for reading that case. An additional excitement, I think, is required in teaching note because faculty member who is going to make a choice whether to use your case or not use your case is going to primarily, I would say, based on the quality of teaching note. I cannot emphasize more on the importance of teaching note. And you would have seen that many cases, I think vast majority of them are never or hardly taught. They get published, they become part of your case repositories, but they hardly get taught. And if you look at what are the cases which are generally get selected for teaching purposes, those are the ones which are very solid, good quality teaching note. So I would also, when reading case, I begin from reading a teaching note. So I look at the teaching note. If teaching note gives me the push, I would go to the case also. Otherwise, I will just skim through the case and I will see that whether do I need to go into the case or not. So I will make up my mind looking at the teaching note whether I want to invest my time as a reviewer in the case or not. So I would now like to elaborate more on the mechanics of teaching note. So and case. So mechanics, I think some of the important dimensions of teaching note is that you clearly lay out the learning objectives. So when I'm looking as a faculty member, when I'm selecting a case, I look at learning objectives. I look at maybe there are 20 cases that I will quickly, maybe in half an hour, I will go through and then I will look at the learning objectives. And if learning objectives are blurred or they are not written there, or they are not exciting, they are not well crafted, well sharpened, I think I will not pick up that case as a faculty member. So I will, as a reviewer, put weight on how well learning objectives of the case have been put in the teaching note, because that will attract attention of faculty members to the journal or repository that I'm reviewing for. Then the next thing is there enough challenge and enough discussion and comprehension in the case? Many times you will see that cases are very well written, but their teaching notes, they hardly pay attention to the real discussion or to get to the real potential of the case. So they don't talk about or comprehensively talk about the main issues in the case. They don't link the case discussion with the theoretical framework. And as a result, they run short of what is an engaging conversation in the classroom. So that is again something that will get a reviewer put off or a faculty member not to select that case as a teaching instrument. Also, I think the other dimension is the approach and flow of conversation that is generally given in the teaching note. So I would expect the case writer to give me flow of the discussion in the teaching note, that how 90 minutes of or 80 minutes of my class are going to go. So what is going to happen first 10 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 20 minutes, so on. And how the conversation in first 10 minutes is going to lead into conversation in the next 20 minutes and next 30 minutes and so on. So many times authors just give their analysis of the situation, but they don't give a flow of how the 90 minutes of a case class will look like. So I would expect a good teaching note to provide that flow. This is helpful for I think I will not say that only for young case teachers, but I would say that sometimes it is also helpful for mature and professional experienced case teachers as well. So I would say that a good teaching note should provide an approach or flow or suggestions for what kind of possible flows can exist in teaching note or in the classroom. Also, how would my board look like at the end of the class? So generally a typical case class teacher uses 5 boards. So 3 boards in the center, which are the main boards, 1 board on right, 1 board on left. So I think a plan of how you can use those 5 boards in your classroom is going to be very helpful for the instructor. So sometimes, your instructors would use one board, maybe the side board, as a place for putting up theoretical concepts or some facts only, and then the main 3 boards for discussion, a main 80 minutes or 70 minutes long discussion, and then the 5th board as something where you can write your takeaways of the case class. So this kind of description or a board's image gives confidence to the reviewer that this has enough material that it can create a discussion for the 90 minutes class. And finally, key takeaways. Don't take it for granted. Many case authors take takeaways as for granted as something that the faculty member or user of the teaching note will discover himself or herself. Do not assume that. Write your takeaways. Write them clearly so that the instructor does not have to put in extra effort. Remember, teaching note is written to reduce the effort of teaching faculty using your case. So you want to reduce the effort of your teaching faculty and make them successful. If you reduce their effort, you help them become successful as a teacher in those 90 minutes when the instructor is going to use your case. The tendency of your the tendency that your case will be selected for teaching will be high, and that's what you want to do with your case. And reviewer will also like it. Now, coming to the case, what are the mechanics of a good case? I will take maybe 2 more minutes to wrap up this. So case, I think the first thing is the decision focus or the opening paragraph. So I would say that in the opening paragraph, you have to communicate the decision clearly, and you have to highlight the tension in the decision. Why that decision is complex, why it is difficult to tackle, why students get hooked into it, why it is to be taken now, on timeline, why this decision cannot be delayed. So you have to do that in the opening paragraph so that there is enough motivation for the student to read the rest of the case and try to figure out that what are the facts that are important to take those questions, to address those questions or take decisions. So I think opening paragraph is the heart of the case. So spend more time in writing your opening paragraph, getting clarity, and then go to the body of the case. Now, coming to the body of the case, I think there are 3 main sections that a case can be divided into. First is the industry background and the company background, the context in which the current scenario is placed in. And then is the main, you can say, issues of the case, main meat of the case. And then finally, the decision, which is the tail end of the case, where you highlight that what are the key tension points, what are the contradictions, what are the conflicts, what is making the decision complex, why it is worrisome, why it cannot be delayed. All that is what has to come in the decision focus or towards the end of your case. And finally, I think a very important factor is how you present your case. Earlier, my colleagues were talking about clarity of writing, clarity of organization of papers. It's absolutely applicable in case writing also, how you present data, how you organize data, how you use video links or exhibits or diagrams or tables, how you connect them in the body of the case. So all that is what is going to be helpful for your reader to read well your case, and also for the reviewer to appreciate that what information is there in the case and can be used. So with that, I think I will conclude my description of what reviewers look for in a good case or teaching note, and I can take on questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Professor. You gave a beautiful step-by-step analysis, well-deserved glass of water. You gave a lot of points in a very succinct fashion, and very methodical. What I found was interesting is that you talk about learning objectives. We're used to that as academics for our classes, isn't it? When we devise a syllabus, so obviously we start with learning objectives. So it's kind of inculcated in us in terms of training. But yes, you're absolutely right. For a case, I mean, that really should be the upper part in the mind. And what I also found interesting is that you're saying the case, the teaching analysis, the teaching is the teaching notes are obviously very important, but so is the opening. So the opening and the ending kind of thing, both of them are very important. There's a couple of questions, if I can direct this to the last two speakers. One is from Balram Bhushan of XUB on case teaching. He's asked a very interesting question, that why are teaching notes for faculties only? Is it not creating information dissymmetry? I beg your pardon, asymmetry? Should we not have the teaching note open for everybody concerned? Something to think about. Would anybody like to take that question?
Okay. The teaching note is an instructional note.
Right.
I don't know why the name is stuck called the teaching note. It's actually the instructional note. The idea is that the teacher, the instructor, knows a little more about the theory than the student. The student both of them can equally catch up with the context. But what happens in the classroom is when the context meets the theory. When in the classroom context meets the theory, you want to prepare the instructor with a little more and be able to guide the discussion around the context meets the theory, and to be able to evolve, put that framework together in the classroom. And therefore, the instructional note is about what is likely to happen in the classroom, to be able to drive. So this is a navigation map. It's not something that the student should have. The student should learn through a process of exploration and discovery in the classroom. But the instructor to explore and discover, they may not reach the same place. They may not reach the learning objectives. So therefore, we need a navigational map for the instructor, but not for the student.
So maybe it's more accurate to call it an instructional note. You're absolutely right. Another question from Lekha Warrior about the language to be used when writing a case. Should it be conversational, narrative? And can you be rejected if you use very flowery language in spite of having good theory and a good teaching note? So any comments about the language of a case teaching, of a case study and the note also?
I would write the language with keeping in mind the instructor in mind. If I'm writing a teaching note to be taught by an undergraduate instructor, I would keep the instructor's background, theoretical background, qualifications in mind when I write the teaching note. And quite a lot of times my teaching notes are personalized. I've taught it myself. I do this first, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this. I've experimented it, I've experienced it, I'm sharing my experience of instruction with others. So personal first person notes are welcome. And there's no prescribed style. As we say, style is your choice. There's no prescribed style. But yeah, too much flowery, too much jargon throwing to prove that you are the only one who understands the theory in the world is definitely a no-no. But if you're able to simplify that and be able to help, like I said, it's a navigational map. How will that 90 minutes go in the classroom? So if you can help the instructor navigate, that style suits best.
Any comments you'd like to make?
The case-based pedagogy is based on helping students come across surprises and discovery. So teaching note has all that scheme, that how those surprises will come and how they will discover. So if somehow you make that teaching note available to students, that surprise element that will come in the class, that aha moment in the class, will be already eliminated from the conversation. And why that surprise moment is important, because if you see how learning works, as an individual, we remember those things that we came across for the first time. So when you come across a surprise, your retention increases. So if in the class you don't see that surprise, your ability to retain that knowledge and as a result then apply that knowledge reduces. So therefore, the teaching note or instructional manual, different people call it, some Harvard, for example, they call it teaching note, Case Research Journal of NACRA, they call it instruction manual. So they don't make it public, they don't make it available to the students so that the instructor can create those surprise moments and moments of discovery and retention and application. And also on the past, so it is recommended, and it is how cases are written. Cases are written in the past tense, and the reason is that you assume that your case will be taught 10 years from now also, maybe 20 years and 30 years from now. So if somebody at that point in time is reading your case, that person is reading your case in the past tense. So therefore, even if I'm reading that case today, which if it was written 10 years before now, or maybe 20 years before now, if it is written in the past tense, the language consistency will remain in place intact for the case. So that's why the case is written in the past tense.
Thank you so much. Just one more quick question before we go to Aisha Khan. Can a case be accepted without financial data, especially when the company is not willing to disclose such information? This question is from Munmun Goswami. Any advice on that?
So on this, Professor Srinivasan, you expect me to respond to this?
I can take it as well.
Okay, but I give my view and then you can also pick up. So on financial data and data which companies are not willing to share, there are multiple approaches. One is that you maybe codify that data, or you multiply that data with a factor that it becomes, it does not disclose the real information of the company. So companies sometimes are willing to do that. Another strategy is that you can anonymize the company. I would not follow that approach, because when you anonymize the company, the excitement that students will have for knowing about a specific company in their mind will go down. So when you anonymize, it very quickly starts looking like an imaginary case or a chair case. So I think that should be the second strategy or last strategy. So I think these are a couple of approaches that one can take. Professor Srinivasan can add more with his experience.
See, I believe that financial data has been an obsession because we want to have a sense of size and proportion of the company. We do not want to go to understand about a company without knowing how big or small it is. We talk about the country's largest chain, and we're talking about it as 3 outlets or 15 outlets. We talk about human resource attrition challenges, and then you discover that the company is talking about 5 employees. So therefore, to provide the readers with a sense of size and proportion is why both size data and performance data is important. We want to showcase that this is a high-performing company. And therefore, the default option is to go to financial performance. If you really can't get to financial performance, if you really have a roadblock, go and figure out that metric that is aligned to your learning objective. If my learning objective is attrition, if my learning objective is specific to what are the strategies that I'm doing to incentivize people to reduce attrition, I should go back and surely talk about the size of the firm in terms of number of employees, in terms of recruitment, in terms of attrition. Even if I can't get so much financial data, but at least a sense of profitable company. But if I'm talking about this company is going to make investments, and is this investment going to give me returns in the future, I can't write a case on investments without giving financial data. If you really have a startup which is unwilling to give you the sense of size, then ideally you should not be writing a case about them. Just because it's novel, fancy, will not necessarily attract students, because it may not have something reasonably theoretical to be able to relate to. We're not writing a story in a newspaper, in a business journal, where I'm trying to introduce a company. If I'm saying that this is a great company, yeah, guys, follow up this company. If that's the purpose, then write it in Business World, write it in Forbes, write it in newspapers. If you're writing a case with the intent of teaching this in the class, then I need to have a sense of size and proportion.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Aisha, for your patience. Last but certainly not the least, you've been involved with AJMC for many years, as I know. Like I said, we've worked on this together in the past. So, if you could share your rich knowledge and expertise that you have gained over the years. So what works as a case and, a published case, and what doesn't work, if you could just give us some idea. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Pal. And thank you to Professor Srinivasan and Dr. Shakil Jaja. I think they explained the review process beautifully. And I'm sure it's been of great help to the audience. So first, let me share with you some background on Asian Journal of Management cases. It is a peer-reviewed journal that aims at providing high-quality teaching cases in the socioeconomic context of developing Asian countries. We have recently also included cases from other developing countries outside of Asia. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but generally. The journal is included in Scopus, in ESCI, Emerging Sources Citation Index, in the Australian Business Deans Council list, and you can visit the AJMC website to view the entire list. So in each issue of AJMC, we have 4 to 5 teaching cases, and teaching cases should be accompanied with a teaching note. I think this is on the importance of the teaching note. Actually, a lot of the things that I was going to talk about have been discussed. So I'm going to just quickly try and summarize all of those things. So the teaching note will not be published, but it is crucial for the review process. So whenever we get a case which does not have a teaching note, it does not move forward. AJMC, another thing I would like to clarify is that AJMC does not publish pure research or applied research based on field studies. It only publishes teaching cases. On occasions, we have made some exceptions in which we have published analytical cases, but that is few and far in between. But we do accept analytical cases sometimes. However, our priority is, and what we want is to publish teaching cases which have a decision focus. I get questions from authors many times about what to include in a teaching note. I will share my email address in the Q&A section, I think, or and you can email me and I will send you some standard templates which you can use. Which will help you in writing a good case, a good teaching note, and we will also share with you some sample cases which have been previously published in AJMC. So to sum it up quickly, a teaching note must include a brief synopsis of the case, identification of the intended course and audience, the topics it covers, and its teaching objectives, as has been discussed earlier. Assignment questions for student preparation along with a full analysis of each question. That is also very important. Sometimes we get teaching notes, you know, when a submission is received, so the managing editor, before it goes on to the area reviewer, so we quickly do a quick, you know, we kind of do a check mark as what's in the teaching note. And these are some of the things that if they are not present, we'll send the case back. So assignment questions are also very important. A teaching plan, which must include the expected flow of discussion through key questions, role-playing, whatever you have in mind, handouts in class and use of audio visuals. Also follow-up of the information about the decision actually taken, when that is applicable. It is not applicable in each case. A clear citation of the research basis for data collection used in the case, a list of associated readings of theoretical material relating the case to its field or course. This is just a quick summary, does not include everything. As for the case, as Dr. Jaja said, always use the past tense throughout the case, except in direct quotes and exhibits. I think by now there's a lot of material available on how to write a case, what's required. So sometimes I can be surprised that we still receive cases which do not have some of these very basic requirements of a case. And it is also important because it shows the reviewer that you are familiar with the norms of case writing. Always use information the company will approve the release of. That's also important, getting a release. Your case outline will generally follow the following format. So there will be an opening paragraph, there will be the company background, specific area of interest, specific problem, alternatives, and conclusion. When Dr. Mohan, discussed his reasons for desk reject, I thought that I think I should share some of them as well. So when a case comes to us, the when I open it and read it, so the first thing I would read is the opening paragraph. As Dr. Jaja said, it is very important. So I will read the opening paragraph and see if there is a decision to be taken or not. And I might just quickly go to the concluding paragraph as well. And then I will open the teaching note. So if the teaching note has all of the basic requirements that I have indicated earlier, or then what Dr. Srinivasan and Dr. Jaja have mentioned, then we'll send the case off to the reviewers. So if those requirements are not met, if there is a weak teaching note, weak objectives, there's no decision focus, or if we feel that the case cannot be taught in the class, then again, we will send it back. So this is the very first thing the managing editor will do before sending the case to the reviewers. As for the review process, AJMC, just like all other SAGE journals, has a website. You can go to the website, refer to the online submission guidelines. The guidelines there are quite extensive and will help you in writing the case. We have given case writing guidelines on our website. The journal is a biannual journal published in March and September every year. And it is, when the case comes in after being reviewed by the managing editor, then it is sent to 2 area reviewers. I have to say one of the challenges for most journals and also for us as a case journal has been to get good area case method reviewers. It's not easy. And I think Dr. Mohan will also agree that editors have to keep on, networking with professors globally and try to convince them to keep on reviewing for us. The review process can take up to 3 months for the first review to get back to you. We are working on speeding up the process, and hopefully it will get better. I think that's about it. I've pretty much covered it. Professors earlier covered everything about case writing. And so these are the most specific guidelines for sending cases to AJMC. If you have any further questions, you can always email me and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Fantastic. If I can now put a question out to, anyone can take this up. One person has asked that, very often we'll send a paper to a journal and it could be rejected, and then you want to kind of take the advice of the reviewers, redo something and send it to another journal. So what should you bear in mind in terms of customizing it to another journal? I mean, I'm glad that question is even being asked and it's not just being copy pasted and sent to another journal, right? But what kind of advice would you give to scholars?
Sorry.
Please.
Go ahead, Pavitra.
Okay, I just answered the question as well. So once you decide on a journal to send the paper, look at the author guidelines where each journal specifies what their objectives is, what type of papers they accept, whether conceptual, empirical, and so on. And they would have mentioned like how many words maximum for the abstract, whether it's structured, like Mohan said, Emerald wants structured abstract. So what type of abstract do they require? What are the contents, how to write, how the heading should be, how the reference style should be. Then you have to fine tune your paper to the aims, to match the aims when you resend it. So I would say, look at the starting point would be the author guidelines.
Anybody else? Anybody else want to answer this?
Just to add to Pavitra's comments, if the peer review or the decision letter has clearly said that the language editing is very poor, then it's simply stupid on your part to send it to another journal without making those corrections. Or if the decision letter says that theoretical development is not good, there is no practical discussion, whatever specific feedback is, you don't have to completely change the paper, because reviewers are again different, for different journals, and therefore what satisfied one journal may not satisfy another journal. But as I think, as Pavitra was saying, it's your paper, and unless you want to to publish, the really top quality paper, it adds to your CV, not to ours. So, please, respect the reviewers and the editors who are giving you feedback for spending their own free time. All of this is voluntary work. None of us are getting paid for this. So I think you've got to have that sense of respect. A lot of times we receive angry letters saying, how can you reject a paper without giving proper reason? Well, we can't really give detailed feedback to every paper because, 250 submissions a year, we can't sit and write feedback. So sometimes we have to simply say no to a paper without giving specific feedback.
For that, and then obviously, what is it's very obvious that if you have a paper which is rejected and you send it to another paper, let's say the style guide says that the style is different, so from APA it goes to CMS, Chicago Manual, or Harvard Style, and obviously you have to completely redo the citations and references according to that. That's something you really, really need to take care of, and that's a non-negotiable. There's an interesting question here about, where's it gone? Amita Matwani. If there's a case study about an ethical issue, say an unethical behavior of a company, can the case be written on the basis of secondary sources, like a court judgment or a newspaper report about it, without taking consent from the company, because the company won't give consent, most probably? So how do you tackle such a tricky situation? Ethical issue in a case study, yeah.
Okay, I'll take this question.
Please.
It's been about 23 plus years of writing cases for me. I still am not confident enough to write library cases. These cases are called library cases. Library cases are information from the public domain, but as a case author, you need to be able to add significantly more insights than what somebody can pick it up from the public sources. So if you are not able to do that, do justice to adding more insights, significantly more insights, then library cases will end up being a journalistic report. You'll add to one more journalistic report about the company, or introduce your own biases, introduce your own interpretation of the context. The idea about a case is to use a theoretical frame to analyze the context. You end up collecting data from the public sources. You should be able to significantly add value without biases. And that's not easy. Seriously experienced case writers do library cases.
Advice in a nutshell is keep away from those kind of cases, I guess.
I think you should have about half a century of experience before you do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for being realistic. I just like to ask a question to the panel, since we are dealing with South Asian, journals. Very often I talk to a lot of doctoral scholars around the country, and they will take some study from the West and kind of replicate it and say that this is an original story because I'm doing it in India, Pakistan, a replication study, which we know is not going to get very far. It won't really hit the B and the A grade papers, beg your pardon, journals. So what do you suggest? And even in your journals, which have a very specific South Asian bent, I would assume you're still looking for something original, something that contributes to knowledge. So what would you comment about replication studies?
If I may start, I think more and more journals, even the A-star journals, are accepting that not every paper can come out with a new theory. But that said, you need to definitely make some distinct contribution to existing body of knowledge, which is, for instance, if you're testing a leadership theory that has been developed in a Western country, now you need to adopt it. Now that comes at the research design stage itself. Now this is something that I've learned, in my own experience. It is always very difficult to retrofit a theory after research has been conducted. So you need to pay attention to this at the research design stage itself, in terms of what kind of research instruments you're using. So if you're testing a Western leadership theory, for instance, in India, now can you customize it to suit the South Asian context, if not the Indian context? right? I mean, look at the indigenous leadership papers in the South Asian context and see whether you can use some constructs or some items from their questionnaires and put it in your research design. So it's got to be contextualized to the region on which the journal is based on.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to talk about replication studies?
See, in such studies, if, for example, you want to test some supply chain theory in India or Pakistan, then you have to make a case that why supply chain operations are different or unique in India or Pakistan, and therefore this theory that was developed in a different context does not apply here. So when you do that, in doing so, you naturally come up with some new construct, or you come up with an application of the theory in a different way. So that creates a contribution. So you can't simply say that here is a theoretical framework applied in Mexico, and now I'm just collecting data on the same framework from India, and here are the same results. So you can't do that. You have to make a case that why what is applicable in Mexico or US is perhaps not as such applicable in India and Pakistan. So here is a new theorization of this phenomena, and I want to test that. So for that is the type of studies that perhaps Professor Mohan is talking about when you try to customize and sell as a contribution to theory. That is an extension of theory in a developing country context, for example.
Another question I'd like to pose is, what would you advise a doctoral scholar? I mean, usually when we talk about a thesis, we talk about try and aim for at least 3 papers from your thesis. But what would you advise scholars in terms of getting their thesis published, whether it's a case study, research methodology, or any other quantitative or qualitative research methodology? What would you advise in terms of kind of converting it into eventually a research paper? We know that, from a publisher's point of view, theses don't quickly get converted into books. There's about a 95% rejection rate if somebody says their whole thesis to a publishing house to get turned into a book. It's usually rejected because it's too much of a, specialized document for the general reader. But any advice about, how to write your thesis in a way that it can lead to publishable papers? Does anybody want to take this up?
If you want to, let's say your literature review, unless you have done what is called the structured literature review, you won't be able to publish that separately as a paper. Because most of the journals look, if you want to publish it as a review paper, it has to be very what we call not the traditional, but the structured. In terms of converting your empirical part into possible articles, which is more than one, I would say be careful that you don't slice it, what we call the salami. You don't slice it into too many small parts where it's not, you're again not making any contribution, or it becomes a very simplistic study which doesn't add anything to the knowledge. So we have to be very careful in converting the empirical part into articles.
Thank you. Anybody else? Does anybody?
Here is that when you are so it should begin from the point when you are conceptualizing your thesis. I think at that stage, you conceptualize your thesis in such a way that it is 3 papers or 2 papers or 4 papers. So you conceptualize it in that manner, and then you execute it accordingly. If you have not done that, then maybe if you are in the middle of the process, then try to pick up papers and give them from your main conceptual model, and then convert them into 3 papers and try sending them in right journals as soon as you can. So I think that's the way.
Thank you.
And you have to be also, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add very quickly, just as a reminder, that you have to update your literature review, because that would have got a bit outdated in the process. Please, ma'am, carry on.
So when we are trying to publish few from your thesis or dissertation, we have to be careful of self-plagiarism as well. so that the same thing doesn't appear in all your other papers.
Correct. Thank you for that. Any last comment? We just have another few minutes. Any last comment by anyone? Some fantastic pearl of wisdom that you want to put out there, please?
There was a question on how to respond to reviewers' comment when you are submitting your paper to a new journal. So what I have experienced is that, and what is commonly known among good journals is that, you see, when you're targeting A or A-star journals, the list of reviewers is very limited. So it may happen that you got rejected from one good journal and you submit your work to another journal, and you may come across the same reviewers or maybe one of the same reviewers. So in A-star or A journals, the experts are very limited, and there is a significant probability that you might end up with the same reviewer. It happened to me in one of the papers. So I submitted to, I think, Journal of Business Ethics, and then it got rejected from there. I submitted it to, I think, IJPE, International Journal of Production Economics. It was the same, paper, not much change, and it ended up with the same reviewer. And the outcome was also the same. So you see, but the positive thing in my case was that we did some work on it. So the takeaway is that whatever review feedback you get, thoroughly work on it as much as you can before you submit your work to the new journal. And if you take that feedback in first few days, you will think that that feedback is useful, but sleep over it. 1 week or 10 days from the feedback, receiving of the feedback, you will find out the feedback is valid to a large extent. So absorb it and apply it and improve your paper before you submit your work to the next journal.
Thank you so much. That's the last word. Very useful. That's also a very good reason for not sending your paper out to many journals at the same time, because you can end up with the same reviewer and then you get blacklisted from all those journals, because that's also regarded as unethical. You have to send it to one journal at a time and wait for the reviewers to get back to you. If reviewers take a long time, you can always write to the chief editor and ask, why is it taking so long, and could you let me know how long it will take? You have that liberty to write to the chief editors, just to let the audience know. Talking of new journals, we're starting one. I'm launching a journal at BML Mundial University. It's our first journal, which is going to be Journal of Business, Ethics and Society. And I'll be contacting all of you experts for mentorship on that. And I must thank you for this absolutely wonderful session. I myself have learned a lot, so I'm sure everybody in the audience has too. And maybe we can do some more such sessions. And I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.